The chill of February 2015 hung heavy over Bristol, England. A 16-year-old named Rebecca Watts, a girl affectionately called Becky by those closest to her, seemed to just evaporate from her residence in the Crown Hill area of St. George. Her sudden disappearance triggered a massive, frantic manhunt, marking one of the largest search operations the local authorities had ever conducted. Yet, the gruesome truth waiting at the end of that search shattered the local community, forcing the entire country to confront a deeply unsettling reality. How exactly do the most defenseless among us slip right through our fingers? Forget the classic boogeyman lurking in the shadows. This narrative centers on a profound internal treachery, a fatal strike delivered by the very bloodline meant to keep her safe. You are about to hear a tale of dark fixation, calculated malice, and the chilling, silent manner in which pure cruelty can mask itself behind the mundane facade of everyday domesticity. To grasp the sheer horror of her ultimate fate, however, we have to look backward at the fragile life she led. Brace yourself. Are you prepared to explore the most sinister shadows of Britain? We are pulling back the curtain on our latest publication, Unreal True Crime, British Edition. Inside, you will find 35 terrifying accounts of real-world bloodshed, guaranteed to haunt your sleep. Ready to purchase right now through Amazon in print and digital formats, or available as a direct download straight from our official site. Check the description area for the exact addresses. Do not let this slip by. Secure your volume right away. Let us step back into the shadows of today's grim file. Rebecca Marie Watts drew her first breath in Bristol on June 3rd, 1998. Born to Darren Goldsworthy and Tanya Watts, her early existence was immediately shadowed by a profound sense of chaos and shifting ground. The romantic bond between her parents had fractured before she even entered the world, leaving the little girl to navigate her formative chapters solely in her mother's orbit. As time passed, alarming signs of inadequate care forced authorities to intervene, temporarily placing her in the foster system until she and her brother, Dan, were ultimately relocated to their father's household. When looking back at the official government post-mortem of the tragedy, investigators categorized the slain teenager as a profoundly complex individual born into an inherently broken domestic environment. However, the memories held by those who actually cherished her reveal something starkly different. A fiercely bright, compassionate soul painted in devastatingly intimate detail. Darren recalled his daughter as a force of nature, possessing a deeply resolute and unyielding spirit. He saw a maturity in her that far outpaced her youth, a radiant grin capable of disarming anyone, and a wonderfully strange wit wrapped in a blanket of fierce devotion. Friends and relatives universally remembered her as the ultimate mediator, a young woman desperate to stitch her fractured relatives together, consistently bending over backward to neutralize toxic arguments before they could rot the family dynamic. A deep affinity for animals defined her, specifically seen in the endless hours she spent putting the household dog in silly outfits and wandering the neighborhood. She also harbored a quiet talent for sketching. Handcrafted greeting cards were her love language, along with spontaneous dancing, cozy movie marathons, board games, and wearing ridiculous costumes purely to elicit a smile from the room. At her absolute core, she was undeniably an empath, navigating the world with an open, bleeding heart, even if she retreated into a quiet shell when navigating the crowded, unfamiliar halls of her high school. Yet, once wrapped in the safety of her chosen peers, the timid facade melted away, revealing a radiantly authentic and deeply protective companion. She operated as a silent guardian for her inner circle, constantly scanning the room to shield others from harm, even as she silently drowned under the weight of her own unspoken trauma. Bureaucratic reports would later label her as a highly at-risk minor, noting a paper trail of social service interventions attempting to manage her psychological struggles and her heavy burden as a juvenile caregiver. But beyond those sterile institutional red flags, this girl was actively forging a future. She had built a solid social network and even found a romantic partner. The pieces of her life were finally snapping into place, making the theft of her remaining years all the more tragic. Fast forward to 2013, when Darren tied the knot with his new partner, Angie. This union brought a new element into the house. Angie's offspring from a prior romance, a man known as Nathan Matthews. A full decade her senior, he was 26 years old when the wedding bells rang, and 28 by the time the nightmare of February 2015 descended upon them. On the day of the ceremony, the newly merged clan posed for photographs, projecting a flawless illusion of domestic bliss. He held the title of Best Man, while she walked the aisle as a bridesmaid, yet behind closed doors, a toxic, volatile undercurrent was quietly poisoning the air. Clashes between Darren and his new stepson were a recurring theme, and the younger man carried a bizarre behavioral track record that, looking back, screamed of impending danger. Although official state documents ultimately argued that his past encounters with the system, which included interventions for volatile rage and psychological instability, failed to definitively signal the savage brutality waiting on the horizon. Take 2008, for example, when he paraded a new romantic interest into the house, swearing she was 19. The reality? The girl was a mere 15 years old. Later, as the teenage Becky battled a devastating eating disorder, her stepbrother utterly weaponized her pain, coldly informing everyone that her starvation was just a pathetic cry for the spotlight. This behavioral loop stripping a young girl of her trauma, mocking her psychological agony, and framing her desperate cries for help as mere theatricality was a glaring neon sign pointing straight to his core. His partner in the shadows was a woman going by the name of Shauna. Her own past was shadowed by trauma. When the two collided, they built an airtight, isolated world where only they existed. It was the sort of toxic union that did not keep demons in check. It fed them, taking their darkest urges and cranking up the volume. The fallout from this twisted bond would ultimately turn lethal. Long after the fact, the official homicide report would unearth a parallel, far more silent tragedy running beneath the surface. This was not merely a tale of senseless slaughter, but a grim account of how a fragile teenager slipped right through the cracks, entirely misunderstood by the very systems meant to protect her. That context is crucial, primarily because the red flags were flying in plain sight well ahead of February 19, 2015. Thursday, February 19, 2015. The dawn broke without a hint of malice. The teenager had just arrived back at her own doorstep after a sleepover. Inside the Crown Hill residence, everything was dead silent. Her stepmother, Angie, was scheduled for a medical visit and was miles away. By all appearances, it was just another mundane weekday. At 10:50 in the morning, Nathan Matthews and his partner rolled up to the property. Before arriving, they had made a quick, chilling pit stop at a Tesco supermarket to grab batteries. The driver did not park like a normal visitor. He backed the vehicle into the driveway, positioning the trunk right against the entrance, a subtle, deeply calculated maneuver. At exactly 11:03 a.m., the young girl fired off what would become the last text she ever sent her boyfriend. Shauna slipped out to the backyard for a cigarette, leaving Nathan to head straight for the trunk of his vehicle. From it, he pulled out a duffel. Inside that bag lay a terrifying inventory. A stun gun, restraints, heavy-duty tape, a face covering, and an oversized transport sack. He made his way down the hall, rapped on Becky's door, and waited for her to open it. The ensuing nightmare was as rapid as it was savage. A ferocious physical fight erupted in the small space, and amid the frantic scuffle, the disguise Nathan was wearing shifted. Suddenly, Becky was staring directly into her attacker's eyes. She knew exactly who he was. That flash of recognition triggered an immediate, desperate panic in Nathan. Whatever twisted agenda he had originally orchestrated completely disintegrated, driving him to make a fatal, irreversible choice. He wrapped his hands around her throat. He forcefully smothered her face, blocking her airways with his bare hand while she lay half-shoved into the canvas bag. 16-year-old Becky Watts, a creative soul, a family mediator, a teenager who just loved making people smile by dressing up the household dog, had the life crushed out of her right in her own sanctuary. The aftermath of the murder brought absolutely no guilt, nor did it prompt a frantic plea to emergency services. Instead, what came next was icy, calculated, and meticulously orchestrated. It was the absolute eradication of a crime scene by two individuals who, over the ensuing hours and days, displayed a level of psychopathic detachment that defies all human comprehension. They stuffed the teenager's lifeless body into the large canvas duffel, then hauled it out to the driveway and shoved it into the trunk of Nathan's vehicle. By the time Angie walked through the front door from a doctor's visit at 12:45 that afternoon, Nathan and Shauna were just hanging around the house, acting perfectly casual and flawlessly executing the illusion of normalcy. Later that evening, at 5:00 p.m., the victim's boyfriend knocked on the front door. Deeply anxious after hours of radio silence on her phone, Shauna greeted him, stepping effortlessly into the character of the worried relative, even going so far as to fake a quick sweep of the property to look for her. Later that night, the pair drove back to their own residence. With the macabre cargo finally pulled from the trunk, they hauled Becky's remains into their bathroom and proceeded to butcher her in the tub. Afterward, they scrubbed the entire washroom from top to bottom, erasing the gruesome mess with forensic attention to detail. To mask the inevitable stench and hide their horrifying handiwork, they heavily packed the remains using garbage liners, cling film, feline odor crystals, and heavy table salt. Then, in a display of sickening callousness, while the dismembered teenager sat just rooms away, the couple casually ordered delivery from local pizza and Chinese joints. Nathan even went out of his way to fake a conversation on his cell, performing a one-sided script to build a false alibi. Deep into the night, he took a trip to a nearby hardware megastore, walking out with a motorized saw, heavy-duty work gloves, a respirator mask, and safety glasses. It wasn't until Friday, February 20th, at 4:00 in the afternoon, that authorities finally received a dispatch call flagging Becky's disappearance. When questioned, the murderous duo fed investigators a fabricated story about hearing the front entry slam the day prior, planting the seed that she had just walked away voluntarily. Under the cover of darkness, the couple sat down to consume a deeply disturbing piece of digital media, a video tutorial bearing the chilling title, "Do You Want to Hide a Body?" As the week dragged on, the two went about methodically acquiring an arsenal of disposal materials: trash bags, heavy-duty contractor sacks, protective gloves, industrial cling film, chlorine bleach, scouring pads, and duct tape. By February 23rd, investigators arrived at their residence for questioning, only to be met with dead silence and a locked door. Later that very afternoon, at exactly 4:38, their digital footprint revealed them querying the internet with the exact phrase, "Find Becky Watts," sitting back to observe the psychological destruction of her loved ones in real time, morbidly tracking the massive manhunt for the exact same teenager they had already slaughtered. Deep into the darkest hours of February 24th, surveillance footage tracked a light-colored utility van slipping quietly through the streets of the Barton Hill neighborhood. Inside that vehicle lay the dismembered fragments of their victim, destined for a concealed grave. Meanwhile, the joint alibi they had spoon-fed to detectives claiming they merely heard the front entryway latch shut and insisting the teenager had vanished of her own free will was rapidly crumbling apart as the undeniable forensic reality began pointing toward a much darker truth. By the 25th of February, law enforcement units descended upon the primary family residence located on Crown Hill, executing a full-scale tactical sweep of the property. The discoveries inside were horrific and absolute. Crimson smears painted across the wooden trim of the victim's sleeping quarters, alongside distinct shoe impressions stamped firmly into the pooling gore. The lab results erased any lingering doubt the blood belonged to Becky, while the boot tracks matched Nathan Matthews perfectly. By February 28th, authorities took Nathan Matthews and his accomplice, Shauna, into custody for suspected homicide, violently pivoting the entire trajectory of the investigation. The search for a runaway had officially morphed into a murder hunt. Later, on the evening of March 3rd, at precisely 10:26 p.m., Matthews finally handed over a written statement, coldly acknowledging that he was the one who ended Becky's life. The motive he offered was chillingly void of emotion. He claimed his only goal was to terrify the teenager into showing more appreciation for their relatives. He outlined a bizarre plot where he intended to abduct the girl, drive her out to a secluded forest, terrorize her, and ultimately let her go. According to his narrative, the moment she saw through his disguise, sheer panic set in, and he silenced her forever. Yet, the physical pathology painted a much darker reality. Medical examiners cataloged over 40 distinct wounds on her remains, revealing a prolonged, agonizingly brutal assault. Pathologists noted 15 separate blows inflicted post-mortem, proving the savagery continued long after her heart had stopped beating. Investigators isolated Shauna's genetic material on the heavy-duty sacks concealing the dismembered parts, as well as on a disguise discarded at the crime scene. Digital forensics unearthed scrubbed text exchanges detailing fantasies of snatching young women, alongside sickeningly specific remarks targeting Becky herself. A devastating puzzle piece surfaced during interviews. Exactly 2 years prior to the murder, the victim had opened up to a close companion. She revealed that Nathan had once walked her through a meticulously crafted blueprint of exactly how he planned to end her life. At the time, that terrifying confession was brushed off as morbid humor, but its echoes would ultimately paralyze the courtroom when read aloud into the record. Authorities also indicted a handful of accomplices tied to transporting and hiding the wrapped parcels that contained the teenager's dismembered body. The verdicts for this secondary group were a mixed bag of acquittals and guilty pleas, exposing the tangled network of bystanders pulled into the grotesque cover-up. The gavel fell to open the proceedings on October 6th, within the solemn walls of Bristol Crown Court. Prosecutors systematically dismantled the defense, detailing the premeditation of the ambush and the sinister kill kit stuffed inside the duffel, exposing how the getaway vehicle was strategically parked and how the couple manufactured their crocodile tears for the cameras. Over the ensuing days, the gallery listened in horror to the deviant text threads, the couple's shared obsession with minors, and their calculated sanitation of the crime scene. It took the jury a mere 3 hours to decide. Matthews was officially found guilty of first-degree homicide, paired with a conviction for plotting an abduction, obstructing illegal burial, interfering with a police investigation, and unlawfully carrying an electronic shock weapon. The judge handed down a life sentence, guaranteeing he would rot behind bars for at least 33 years before even sniffing a parole hearing. Shauna landed a manslaughter conviction, coupled with her role in the abduction conspiracy and the grim cover-up that followed. She was ordered to serve 17 years in state custody. By June 2016, appellate judges swiftly tossed out both of their requests for a retrial. On April 17, 2015, the city of Bristol gathered in collective mourning for the teenager's public service at St. Ambrose Church. The entire neighborhood showed up in staggering numbers, lining the sidewalks to pay their respects, holding candlelight vigils, and sending up a sky full of balloons. They rooted a sapling into the earth to honor her memory. After all, the entire metropolis had spent weeks desperately hunting for the missing girl, intimately learning her story along the way. Darren Goolsworthy, her grieving father, eventually penned a memoir dedicated entirely to his little girl, titled with her namesake to reflect her tragic tale. The pages were his attempt to share the vibrant teenager he raised, stripping away the gruesome headlines and the label of a murder victim, aiming instead to immortalize the kid who put silly costumes on the family pet, who crafted handmade greeting cards, and whose radiant grin could thaw the coldest room. The grim reality of identifying her required advanced genetic matching, a horrific scientific necessity that spoke volumes about the mutilated state of her remains, laying bare the absolute depravity the couple employed to wipe her from existence. The subsequent institutional review didn't just dissect the bloodshed. It put a magnifying glass on the social safety nets that were supposed to catch the teenager while she was still breathing. Investigators asked hard questions. How did social services view this young woman? What red flags in her daily life were tragically misinterpreted or ignored altogether? The official report established critical avenues of investigation regarding the psychiatric care she had access to, scrutinizing the heavy burdens she carried as a youthful caregiver, along with overarching systemic failures in child protection. The findings unveiled a bleak bureaucratic truth. At-risk teens are frequently reduced to a checklist of behavioral issues instead of being recognized as complex humans. And the warning signs are always there, just fatally overlooked. Once the gavel finally came down, law enforcement released a brief, heartbreaking summary of the tragedy. They spoke of an obliterated destiny, a motivated teenager actively laying the foundation for a bright tomorrow, surrounded by loved ones and holding decades of unlived potential. Authorities begged the world to focus on the beautiful light she brought to the world, rather than the darkness of her final hours. Stripped down to its foundation, this tragedy is a masterclass in obsessive predatory behavior, coupled with the devastating collapse of protective agencies that failed to step in before the point of no return. The killer exhibited a complex matrix of red flags, which, when analyzed as a whole, fit perfectly into a clinical profile describing a deviant, predatory attraction to underage youth, deeply entangled with profound sociopathic and egocentric disorders. The red flags appeared early on. By introducing a 15-year-old partner to his family under the guise that she was of legal age, he established a chilling precedent, a calculated effort to mask and justify a deeply predatory fixation on minors. When he brushed off the victim's severe battles with food as mere theatrical pleas for pity, it exposed a profound emotional void, highlighting a disturbing, habitual need to belittle and completely erase the genuine suffering of those around him, a psychological hallmark deeply intertwined with severe narcissism. Official reviews of this fatal domestic tragedy pointed out that his recorded history of instability, which included professional interventions for psychological disturbances and rage control, somehow failed to trigger any alarms regarding his capacity for murder. This fatal blind spot between documented facts and perceived threat levels stands as the investigation's most damning revelation. Meanwhile, the digital footprint they left behind paints a thoroughly stomach-turning picture. Recovered dialogues detailing the kidnapping of young women and their mutual twisted sexual appetites prove beyond a doubt that this attack was never a spur-of-the-moment crime of passion. Instead, it represented a dark obsession that the pair had meticulously fed, analyzed, and slowly transformed from a sick thought into a concrete plan. Everything about the ambush screamed calculation. The specialized kill kit they put together, the deliberately tactical vehicle positioning, and the flawlessly scripted cover story all point to a classic psychological profile: the highly structured predator. This was a killer possessing the sheer mental discipline and logistical foresight required to pull off a horrific, multi-layered atrocity. The suspect's defense, a flimsy narrative asserting he merely intended to frighten the teen and that her death resulted from a botched attempt to hide his identity, is nothing more than a classic, self-serving retrospective excuse. The physical trauma tells the true story. More than 40 agonizing wounds, 15 brutal strikes inflicted after death, and a staggering level of preparation tear his pathetic alibi to shreds. In reality, this slaughter was almost certainly a twisted, psychosexual daydream brought to life the exact second he zipped up his duffel bag. The dark role Shauna played in this nightmare forces us to confront deeply unsettling questions regarding shared guilt, toxic emotional reliance, and the dark psychological bonds of murderous couples. Her continuous role in the nightmare, proven by genetic material recovered from the gruesome packaging holding the victim's body parts, her lingering presence at the crime scene, and her active participation in the days-long concealment effort points toward a severe psychological condition where individuals find erotic arousal in a partner's monstrous acts. It is an attraction fueled entirely by proximity to pure violence and extreme criminal behavior. The ease with which she played the concerned relative while the victim's family was torn apart, casually tracking the investigation online while actively hiding a butchered corpse, demonstrates a staggering detachment from human empathy, fueled by an isolated echo chamber romance that had slowly made the unthinkable feel completely normal. Beyond the twisted psychology of the killers, an equally grim institutional failure shadows this tragedy. A full 24 months before the murder, the victim explicitly confided in a peer about her stepbrother's graphic step-by-step threats to end her life. That horrifying confession fell on deaf ears. Official postmortem investigations analyzing the ways authorities interacted with the teenager, their perception of her fragility, and their assessment of her cries for help highlight a devastating, systemic pattern. Time and again, the desperate pleas of vulnerable youth, especially adolescent females, voicing genuine terror regarding domineering male figures within their own homes, are casually brushed off, wildly misinterpreted, or entirely ignored. The hidden narrative of this tragedy, uncovered through bureaucratic audits rather than dramatic trial proceedings, paints a bleak picture of a struggling youth reduced to mere clinical checkboxes by the system, rather than a living, breathing human desperately navigating a toxic environment. In the end, this horrific slaughter does not represent some unpredictable lightning strike tragedy born out of nowhere. It exposes a creeping, methodical darkness that festered out in the open, cultivated for years by two individuals who actively fed the absolute most sinister parts of one another's souls. All the while, a 16-year-old innocent, harboring no desire other than family harmony, walked blindly into a meticulously laid trap. This nightmare serves as a grim mandate. We must remain hyper-vigilant to the subtle dark undercurrents shifting around our daily lives. And we must absolutely never dismiss a terrified child when they gather the courage to speak up about the monsters in their own homes. Taking a step back to analyze the broader scope, the sequential breakdown of this tragedy unfolds as follows. June 3rd, 1998. Darren Goolsworthy and Tanya Watts welcome their daughter, Rebecca Marie Watts, into the world in Bristol. 2008. The future killer introduces a new romantic partner to his household, insisting she is 19 years old. In reality, she is barely 15. 2013. The family dynamics shift as Darren weds Angie Matthews. The predator stands as best man, while his future victim serves as a bridesmaid. Around 2013, the teenager shares a chilling secret with a companion, revealing that her stepbrother had graphically outlined his plans to end her life. The terrifying warning completely vanishes into the void. February 19th, 2015, 10:50 in the morning. The murderous pair navigate their vehicle toward the Crown Hill residence, following a calculated detour at a local supermarket to procure batteries. The driver deliberately backs the car into the driveway, positioning the trunk for optimal loading access right at the entryway. February 19th, 2015, 11:03 a.m. The young girl transmits the last digital communication of her life to her romantic partner. Mere moments pass before the predator breaches her bedroom door, armed with a sinister containment kit, an electroshock weapon, restraints, heavy adhesive, face concealment, and a large transport duffel. Her life ends in a brutal, breathless struggle. It is 12:45 in the afternoon on February 19th, 2015. When Angie walks through the front door, the two perpetrators are sitting there, playing the part of an unsuspecting, perfectly ordinary couple. Meanwhile, the teenager's lifeless form is concealed just outside, locked away in the trunk of a vehicle on that cold winter afternoon. By 5 o'clock that evening, her boyfriend knocks on the door, desperately hoping to find her. The female accomplice greets him, putting on a chilling performance as she fakes a search through the empty rooms. As darkness falls that same Thursday, the duo transports the stolen life back to their own residence. What follows in the confines of their bathroom is a gruesome, calculated dismantling of the physical evidence. The cover-up demands a trip to a local hardware store. The primary suspect calmly walks the aisles, purchasing a power tool and safety gear as if running an average weekend errand. They then order takeout, casually eating their meal while orchestrating a fake telephone conversation to establish a solid alibi by 4 o'clock the next day. An emergency dispatch finally goes out, officially declaring the young woman missing. When questioned by authorities, the couple spins a web of lies, casually claiming they only heard the front door slam shut the prior day. Later that evening, their digital footprint reveals a disturbing level of mockery. The partners sit back and pull up an online video ominously titled, "Do You Want to Hide a Body?" Over the weekend of the 21st and 22nd, the couple continues their macabre shopping spree, stocking up on more materials to permanently erase their tracks. The grim task of obscuring the crime drags on behind closed doors. By 4:38 in the afternoon on the 23rd, the situation takes an even darker psychological turn. The pair brazenly browse the internet for updates on the ongoing missing persons search. When detectives finally show up to knock on their door, the house remains suspiciously still. In the dead of night, at 2:19 on the morning of the 24th, surveillance cameras spot a white utility vehicle shifting the concealed tragedy toward a new, hidden location in Barton Hill. Investigators secure a warrant for the family residence on the 25th. Forensics uncover a chilling narrative. Drops of the victim's blood and the killer's shoe print stamped right at the threshold of her bedroom. The net completely closes by the 28th of February. Authorities slap cuffs on both suspects, formally hauling them into custody for suspected homicide. At 10:26 on the night of March 3rd, the primary suspect finally cracks under the pressure. He hands over a handwritten statement, owning up to his role in the fatal encounter. His defense is a flimsy psychological excuse. He insists his only intention was to terrify the young woman. By April 17th, a shattered community gathers for a solemn memorial service held at St. Ambrose Parish in Bristol, where grieving masses overflow the aisles. Weeks later, on June 22nd, detectives officially upgrade the charges against his female accomplice, pursuing full homicide charges. The quest for justice kicks off in a high-stakes courtroom on the 6th of October, with a jury seated at the local Crown Court, ready to endure the horrific details. Judgment Day arrives on the 11th of November. The mastermind is found guilty of first-degree murder, while the jury convicts his partner of involuntary homicide. Both face a slew of additional, damning convictions. This includes a calculated, premeditated plot to abduct their target and maliciously interfering with a proper burial. The list of offenses extends to the obstruction of a federal investigation and hoarding banned electrical weapons. 2 days later, on November 13th, the gavel permanently falls. The main orchestrator receives a life sentence, locked away in a concrete cell for at least 33 years, while his partner gets a 17-year term. By the summer of 2016, their desperate attempts to overturn the harsh penalties are swiftly thrown out by higher courts. If this descent into human depravity hooked you, make sure to follow along. We unravel these chilling mysteries every single week. Leave your thoughts in the section below. Were there crucial red flags that the authorities missed, and could this absolute tragedy have been prevented? Let us dive deep into the discussion. The power of listening. We must honor Becky's legacy by becoming hyper-vigilant to the subtle, dark undercurrents shifting within our own homes. The most chilling revelation of this tragedy is that 2 years before her death, Becky explicitly confided in a friend about the graphic threats made against her life. Because it was dismissed as morbid humor, a vital chance to intervene vanished into the void. We must pledge to never dismiss a terrified child when they find the courage to speak. Beyond the checklist, this case exposes a bleak, bureaucratic truth. At-risk youth are too often reduced to clinical checkboxes rather than being seen as complex, hurting human beings. True protection requires empathy that pierces through sterile institutional red flags. Let us remember Becky, not for the darkness of her final hours, but for the beautiful light she brought to the world, the creative soul who loved making people smile. May her story be the catalyst that forces us to listen louder, act faster, and bridge the fatal blind spots in our circles of care.